couple of questions that I want to answer before they even get asked. A subject that's going to be covered next week, but I'll bring it up, and that is monitor calibration. Let's look here. So let's just talk briefly about monitor calibration because it is a really important point in all this because it's really critical. You really need to calibrate your monitor. Why? Think about it. What is it that's so important about your monitor? Because your monitor is where you're making your edits based on what you see on your monitor. And if your monitor is not correct, then your edits aren't going to make any sense to anybody other than you because you're in a closed system that way. It's just you and your monitor. If you adjust things to look good on your monitor, they're going to look good there. But if you share them with anyone else or you send them out for a print, then all hell breaks loose. So you've got to do a monitor calibration. Even if you have like a laptop and a desktop, you're going to see your images change color, often drastically, just going from one to the other. And you don't want that to happen. So you've got to monitor it. How do you do that? Well, you need hardware for that. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that next week. I'll show you the hardware and what happens. But here's the common thing that happens if you don't have a calibrated monitor. Most monitors are set way too bright and you do your edits and everything looks good on the screen, but it's the monitor that's making the file look bright. It's not actually in the file. And if you send that out for a print, you're going to get dark prints because the brightness is coming from the monitor. It's not actually in the file. The other thing that is common is monitors out of the box have a tendency to be too blue. There's a reason for that. And the reason is that blue looks good on video, and everything is video nowadays. Everything is YouTube and Instagram and TikTok, etc. And blue makes the whites in videos look nice. But if you're trying to do color editing or image editing on it, you're going to see this blue, so you're going to try to add a little bit of yellow to counteract that blue. But again, it's the monitor that's adding the blue. It's not actually in the file. So when you send out to a print for a print, you get yellow cast on your prints. So that's the first part of color workflow, and we will talk about that in detail. And speaking of yellow, let's go in and get one right away. And here we have a lovely image of some aspens. So is there a photograph hiding in here? Is there something that we can really, be proud of? And what can we do to make it happen? So let's go ahead and go into the develop module. And let's look at the histogram because the histogram is, you can see the histogram is fine. It goes all the way from the left to the right. Again, to eliminate any confusion, the height of these mountains in the histogram is meaningless. All we care about is the left side, and mostly we care about the right side. If the histogram hits the right side, that means the whites are gone. So the whites look pretty good here. I exposed this just for these aspens. So let's bring up the shadows to add a little bit more life in there. We can bring the exposure up a little bit. But let's go ahead and I'll just do the kind of the salt and pepper, a little bit of texture clarity. I don't think it needs any dehaze at this point. We'll add some vibrance, which will bring up desaturated colors. And you can see, look how the yellow starts to come up. And I don't know if saturation is going to help us other than increase the saturation everywhere because it's mostly just the yellows that are in here. Now, how do we, all right, so we've got something that color looks fine, but how do we create a more interesting image and how do we adjust the color so that the viewer goes where we want them to go? I'm not going to worry about cropping yet, but I do want to get into color. Now, the masking, the automatic masking in this is probably not going to be particularly helpful. There's no sky. Let's just click on subject and see what Lightroom thinks the subject is. And son of a gun, that was handy. That's exactly what I wanted. So the two big things in our color are it's not only color, it's light and dark, and it's warm and cool. Now, typically, usually, cool colors recede. They go off into the background, and warm colors come closer to you. There's exceptions, though, and this is one of them, where the only things that aren't warm in this are the tree trunks. We want them to be more neutral, even a little bit blue. So since the software was able to find the trees and not make us go looking for them, let's go down to color and we'll add some blue into that and then bring up the exposure a little bit more. And you can see just by doing that, it creates a lot of separation. It actually is starting to look three-dimensional now. Now, since we've got this, maybe we want to do something to the background. Let's go ahead and say duplicate and invert the mask, which is going to give us everything but our trees. Oh, we can see there's a little bit up here that got stuck in there. Let's get rid of that. So we'll click on subtract with a brush. And let's just get rid of, oh, my flow must be down here. It is. I don't know what happened there. Let's get rid of that because we don't, the things we're going to do, we don't want to actually do onto this tree. We want to make the leaves more intense. So let's add yellow to them. Now, as we add yellow to them, they're getting kind of dark and they're looking kind of orangey because it's almost like there's too much magenta in them. So let's pull a little bit of magenta out. Now, something that some of you have mentioned to me before is when I'm doing color editing, how do you know what it needs? Well, you've got only two sliders in Lightroom. So that's one thing you can just try it, like go either way. You would think, well, you would never need to add green to leaves to make them more yellow. Well, you would if it's the magenta you want to cancel out because these are showing you the opposite colors. So if something's got too much magenta in, you drag it to the green. Let's also bring it up a little bit. And then we're going to start talking about the tools. I don't want to spend a whole lot on this one. Oh, let's go ahead and add some more clarity, maybe even a little dehaze to the leaves. And okay, how can we make it a little more interesting image? I'm going to bring up the crop tool because this is what I saw when I took this shot. I was picturing this as a panoramic. I was picturing this as something, oh, I don't know, like this maybe. I just wanted to get the aspens and then some of the leaves glowing there. And yeah, let's take a look. That's kind of what I was thinking when I saw it. So what I'd like to do now is go through the color tools in Lightroom and start from the top down. In fact, I made myself a list and just you can maybe see it in the little Hollywood Square thing that you get. I've got six basic places to look for color adjustments in Lightroom. And then I have 2.5 pages of doing it in Photoshop. So let's just go through the Lightroom ones real quick. And we're just going to do it from the top down. And the question came up about white balance. So white balance here is set for as shot. So when we click on here, you see you have all of the kind of standard color temperatures. Well, let's see what happens if we change it. If we make it auto. Oh, that doesn't work. So obviously as shot was better for that. We could try daylight. Let's see what daylight has. Yeah, daylight makes it a little too yellow. So honest, and what is the difference? You can see daylight is 5,500 Kelvin, which is this number right here, and a 10% plus 10 magenta tint. If we go to as shot, you can see that it was a much cooler temperature, 4,600 degrees Kelvin, which is definitely a cooler, or where if we had gone the other way and made it cloudy, a lot of people used to leave their camera white balance on cloudy because they thought it warmed things up. But in this case, it just makes everything really yellow. Now, if you like the leaves, you could do that and then edit out the trees separately. But in this case, the as shot was the answer. What do you do when none of this seems to work? Stay tuned. That's going to come up. We also talked about vibrance and saturation. Again, vibrance is going to increase the desaturated colors, particularly the cooler colors. The blues and greens will get a boost, and pale yellows will get a boost. It tries not to affect skin tones, which actually is going to come up tonight because I had another request, and I'm going to do a portrait edit for you as well. And then overall saturation just boosts all colors evenly. Now, there is another tool that we're going to talk about next week, and that's this thing, the color checker. I know a lot of you how many of you have this? Let me raise your hands. Let me see your pictures. A bunch of you have them. Okay. For those of you, the guys that have them, how many of you actually use it all the time? I'm not, I see one hand going up, two hand, or one and a half, three, all right, three hands going up.
Maybe
Uh,
not all the time, but a lot of the time.
okay, good answer, Stephen. uh, you don't need to use it all the time. That's the whole thing. We'll go into this in detail next week, but just real quickly, for those of you that have kind of fallen off the wagon of using this thing, all you need to do is take a picture of it and make sure it's exposed correctly. You don't want to have anything clipped out of here. Look at the histogram, everything is fine. Here's all you need to do. File, export with preset. Now you have to install the software from either X-Rite or now Calibrite for the color checker. And it includes this little plugin, which automatically gets installed into Lightroom. So you just click on that, you give it a name. I'm going to call it February 4th, and you click save. Now, the profile that this creates is specific to the camera that took it. So if you have multiple cameras, even multiple models, if the sensor is different in them, not going to recognize a profile created with another camera. There's all kinds of metadata in here that the software knows. So in the background, it's creating a profile. And what is this profile? Well, if you look at the screen here, look, you've got red, green, blue, CM, up CMY, up YK. The two basic color palettes, plus a bunch of colors that sort of exist in nature. Now, do you need to do anything for it before you make it? Notice it says it's been generated successfully. You have to restart Lightroom. I have one made already. It doesn't matter. I can have the white balance like that. It doesn't matter because it's actually generating the profile from the colors it sees on this target. You don't have to do anything. But if I now want this to look right, I can go white balance off of here. But we are looking at this through the Adobe Color profile, which is the one that is built in. In some cases, it works okay. But in particular, take a look at, let me zoom in. Let's go to not 200%, 50%. Let's go to 50% and fill the screen with this thing a little bit more. Look at these colors, this color grouping right here, these blues, this red and green, and watch what happens when we apply the custom profile that was just created. And I had created one last week, I called it January 29th. Watch what happens just when I click on this. Do you see all those colors move? Those are the actual accurate colors of what the target looks like under these conditions. Now, this is out in Monument Valley, where you have all that red rock projecting up and reflecting off of everything. And that has a tendency to kill greens and blues, particularly greens. In fact, let's go to 100%. Let's just stare at this green patch and let's see what happens. The Adobe Color, it kind of loses a little bit of life. It's not as bad as I thought it would be versus there. And actually all these colors over here as well. You can see them jumping around. The Adobe Color is costing you a lot of color right from the get-go. By having a custom profile of the place, you get all your colors back. Now, do you need one everywhere you go? No. But what I would recommend you do is at least have one for daylight, have one for cloudy. And if you go out to an odd color location, like a Monument Valley, create one there as well so that you can get all your colors back. Okay, back over here. Let's pick up a different image and we're going to work on some of the other tools as we work our way down. Here's our raw file. So I'll make the virtual copy of that. What does it need? All right, I'll bring the shadows up. I'll bring the highlights down. And yeah, all right, starting to look better. We'll add our basics and let's see. Now, this was not shot in Monument Valley, obviously, but here's the thing about a profile. What a profile does is it records how the camera sees red, green, and blue. You would think there would be a standard for that, but there is not. You can use a profile created anywhere as long as it was created on your camera and even under any conditions. What's really going to be changing that to affect the colors first is the white balance. Let's see what happens if we just apply our Monument Valley profile to this image. And you see, we still get a change. There's the Adobe Color. Now, this is a very subtle image, But notice it added some life back into the grasses. So even with that, now we can add a little bit of saturation, a little bit of vibrance. Now the image is starting to come alive a little bit more. So let's use some color to bring it more to life. What is the subject here? Well, to me, it's actually the fencing. Do you think Lightroom will be able to figure that out? Let's click on the mask. Let's choose subject again. I liked the trees last time. Not too shabby. I can work with that. Let's just click on subtract and get rid of the stuff that's not there. I just subtract and click a brush. I don't want that tree in there. There's a little piece in between here. So just a little trick here. If you click once and then go down to the other end, hold down the shift key and click again, it will get rid of stuff in a straight line. And it's picking up a little of the grass here. That's fine. A little back here. Because what I want to do is I want to make this thing separate out from the background. And again, typically warmer is going to come closer, but if there's only one thing in the image that is cooler, that is different than everything else, that makes it stand out as well. So let's go to exposure, bring that up. Oh, that looks so much better already. Does it need to be cooler? I'm not sure. Let's add a little bit of blue. Yeah, I think I do. Because again, what it's doing is it's separating out from the background. Excuse me. All right, I like it. Especially when you compare, this is what we started with, and that's where we've gotten to. Do I want to highlight the barn a little bit or the building? No. The sky? No. Let's make overall, let's go ahead and let's hit enter on this. Let's add some more saturation. We're going to kind of go Kodachrome on this thing. And let's bring up the exposure a little bit more and then add some contrast. And now it's starting to come to life. However, down here, it's getting a little bit too bright. So we're going to use a light tool here. We're going to hit M, which is the keyboard shortcut for linear gradient, and drag down to here. I think I want the sky darker as well. Let's see what happens if we bring that down. And also, now we're going to use blue in here to what's the word? Desensitize it a little bit. Let's add a little bit of blue to that background, which will make it recede. Oh, there we go. And that looks pretty good. One last thing, you know what? As I look at the old building back here, let's go ahead and paint with that on the brush and bring up the exposure of that too. We'll make that a little secondary. And I think the grass in front of it needs to be a little darker. So let's just paint in front of there and we will darken that grass. There we go. All right. So again, you can see from the color, look how much the fencing has separated itself out from the original. Let's go look full screen. There's our original raw file that we started with, and we wanted to use the color and the light to bring things out. And look what we were able to do as that starts to draw in. I know this isn't about composition, but I can't do an image edit and not talk about composition. As I look at this image, what do you think about composition here? Honestly, the more I look at this, this is just a distraction all the way down here. I actually see this as a vertical. Let's hit R. And I'll tell you what I'm seeing on this. I'm seeing this I'm going to leave that tree in. I'm kind of seeing this image more like this. I think that's really more the image I like. And another light, this is a light rather than color, vignetting. I'm going to add a vignette because adding that vignette, and you can see my turning on and off, it refocuses you back into the middle of the image. And here's one more color light trick you can do. Hold down Shift and M, which is the radial gradient rather, and I'm going to give myself this gradient. I'm going to angle it from the fence to the building in the background. I'm going to subtract the sky out of this. All I have to do is click on Subtract Sky. There we go. And I'm going to bring up the overall exposure of this area here. And there we go. I think that looks so much better. Let's go full screen again. Now we've simplified the subject. We've brought it out. We've made it more prominent. We've separated it out. We've given it dimension from the background. Compared to we started with this, we went to there, and now we have a tighter composition. So what have we done? We cooled off the fencing to make it separate out from the background. Everything, all this grass back here is warm. By adding the cooling temperature, something that normally pushes things back, it's come closer to us because we separated it out. We've got a little bit of coolness on here. Not even sure if I like it. But if you also remember, we cooled down the background here as it gets off in the distance. Now that is further receding off into the background, and the whole image looks so much more three-dimensional. All right. Something I haven't done any edits in quite a while on, and I know there's some of you out there that like this stuff. How about a bird edit? Oh, that got some people that woke up. Roger, you woke up on that one. I saw he just leaned right in. Okay, so let's do a bird. Paula, you probably leaned forward too. This is your neck of the woods. So this is actually in the St. Augustine alligator farm, where I will be back the end of April rather. If you've never been to the Florida, used to be called the Birding and Photo Fest. I think they're getting rid of the word birding in it. Um, the alligator farm is the best place on the planet for me to photograph birds. Why? I'm not interested in flying birds, and you can actually get right up next to these things. So very cool stuff. So when I took this, we're kind of bland here. So we're going to use some other tools. I just created a virtual copy of this, but look at the histogram. As dark as this looks, this is not a terrible exposure. Look how close I got to the edge because you don't want to lose the plumage in here. So let's go ahead and we'll just do some basic edits first. I'm going to bring up the exposure. How much can I get away with? In fact, I'm going to open up the background because I'm going to bring down the highlights. I got to protect this bird. Let's go ahead and add, we'll cut to the chase, add a bunch of vibrance and saturation. And it's still not even close to where we want this to be. We need to start doing our edits locally. So what are we going to do? Let's do the bird first. So we'll click on our mask and let's choose subject and see how good a job it does. And that's pretty impressive. Yes, it's getting some stuff out here, but it's mostly faded. So let's go ahead and bring up the exposure a little more. Also, to me, if you look at the bird in here, let's zoom in 50%. If you look in here, it's looking a little bit yellow. I want to make the bird look a little bit brighter. How do I do that? You guys remember all the detergent commercials way back when we were little? Bluing in Clorox, I think it was. Look what happens when we just add a little bit of blue to the bird. There we go. Now I'm going to add some contrast and I'm going to bring up the exposure a little more and then bring down the highlights. I just want this bird to really pop. While I'm at it, the other part I really want to pop on the bird is the beak, the beautiful green on there. So let's go ahead and zoom in to 100% so we can get in close. I'm going to hit K. Since we're not doing real selection tools tonight, I'm just going to tell you the shortcuts I'm using. I'm just going to hit K to get brush and make sure that my auto mask is on, which it is. And I'm going to select, got messy with my selection. That's all right. Because then you can just hold down the Alt key and it turns it to a minus. And I'll come around to this background stuff that I don't want to affect because I really want to make this thing pop. So I'm going to bring up the exposure a little bit, add a bunch of saturation, and I think I'll make it a little yellower and greener. Yeah, that looks nice. All right. But now we have this background to deal with. Now we've already selected the bird, so we can come up to here again and click on the bird mask we have and click on the three dots and tell it to duplicate and invert the mask, which will allow us to get the rest of the background. But we're going to do this with another tool. We've done the basics. We've done white balance. We've done vibrance and saturation. Let's come down and see what other tools we have that are kind of hidden in here. Well, look, we have curve. What can we do with the curve? Now, what is the curve? What the curve is showing us is basically a copy of the histogram. It looks very different here because it's squished together. But basically, the middle of this is 50%, is your midtones, shadows, highlights. So if we want to bring this up a little bit, we can just raise it up and down, and you can see we can lighten and darken things. So let's bring that up a little bit. But then next to this, we have red, green, blue. Let's bring the greens up a little bit. So if we push the, look what happens. We can make everything go a little bit greener. Blue, do we want some blue? I'm not sure. Let's do bring that. Actually, let's take some blue out of the green because that makes it look a little greener again. All right, we're starting to get there, but we need to do more. Now we need to do a complex selection. We want to create dimension again, and I want to warm up this background, but also make it darker. So how do we do that? Let's get a mask. We're going to do a linear gradient, which is M, and I'm going to go like this. I want to get all of that stuff back there. And again, remember, from the black square to the white, it fades from 50% to 0. So it's okay that it's hitting stuff up here. We just want to subtract out the bird. So we click on subtract, and we already found out that the bird subject, it was able to see it just fine. And there we go. So we're going to change the color temperature. I'm going to make this a little bluer, but then we're also going to bring down the highlights, make it darker. And as I look at it, I think it needs some magenta. Yeah, I just want to darken this thing up a bit. Good. So let's hit K. Where are the problems? This thing back here, this tree trunk, these fronds that have kind of gone dark or dead. And I think that's about it for now, right in there. Let's darken those up. Yeah, we want to get rid of those. Now, the foreground. There's something off about the green here. What does it need? Let's zoom in on here. Yeah, it needs something. There's something color-wise off about it. So let's come down and we're going to do another tool. We're going to use the color mixer. Now, there's two different pieces here. There's the mixer itself, and there's point color. The mixer is broken into hue, saturation, and luminance. Let's check the hue of the green. So we'll click on here, and we can do one of two things. We can start moving the sliders back and forth, or we use this, the targeted adjustment tool, and we can click on the color we want to affect and go up and down and see what happens. Yeah, and you know what? It actually was a little too green. It needed some more yellow put in, but it could also stand some saturation. So let's click on it again. Let's increase the saturation. That's much better. Now, luminance is just the brightness. Let's see. Does it need to be brighter or does it need to be darker? No, you know what? I think this needs to be brighter. All right. And as I look at this all the way up here, I think this side has gotten a little too blue. It actually needs to be warmer. So let's hit M again. And I'm thinking over here, we're going to subtract our subject again. So we got rid of that. I'm also going to subtract with a brush. Let's subtract with a brush because I want to get this part out of it. It's that upper corner that has gone a little bit too kind of blue. So let's warm that up. Yeah, that looks better. And let's even bring the exposure down a smidge. All right, I think we're in pretty good shape. Again, let's take a look full screen. There's the original raw file that we started with. And so far we've turned that into that. Now, I don't know if the whites, I don't know what your screens are like. I don't know if they're calibrated. I don't know if you're seeing detail in the bird or if it's blown out. So let's be safe. Let's go look closer at the bird. We already have a mask for the bird. So if I click on there, you'll see it. Here it is right here. Let's bring the exposure down a little bit on the bird so that those feathers come through a little better. In fact, I'll even bring the whites down a little just to be safe because there's an amazing amount of detail in this particular image. Yeah, there we go. Are we done? Almost. Again, this is all about light and color. What do you think about the cropping? I see a couple of different options here. One, there's too much background for the bird. It's a little bit overwhelming. So let's hit the R key. In fact, before we do that, I'm going to create three different virtual copies, which is Command or Control apostrophe. And let's try three different crops. So I bring up the crop tool. The first one to me, and again, I usually prefer cropping what I think the image needs without worrying about fitting in a frame. And my gut is to do something like this and add a vignette. That's my first choice. The second choice would be similar, but I'm going to break the rule. Typically, when you're dealing with wildlife, you want to leave space where they're going and take it off the back. I'm going to break that rule. I'm going to put the bird on the right because I think that maybe that tree was kind of strong. So maybe something like this works better. And if we do something like this, now we have another problem because we've left a different part of the image way too bright. Let's see if the software can see that that blue stuff in the background is sky. And the answer is not really. It caught it up here, but that was about it. So let's add to that with a brush. And let's get all these spots down here that are just too bright. When you do your final crop, you're going to sometimes find that your edit needs to change and you're going to need to adjust light and color to make it work. So I'm going to bring the exposure down on those. And I'm going to pick up some more here. Yeah, let's even get some of the leaves in there. I'm going to flatten the contrast and bring the exposure down and bring down the highlights and the whites. Just, it's okay that it's still there, but we want to take away the brightness from the image. And again, something to think about when you're doing your color editing, your crop is going to have an effect on it. And one more, strangely enough, I see this might work as a square. So let's go to the crop tool and just choose 1:1 and get in closer. This is the kind of thing that would look nice if you're going more decorative, more focused on the animal than than the environment that it's in, and something like that. So let's go through what we've done. Here's the original raw file. Here's our kind of first global edit with everything in there. Here's the first crop. We've put the bird over on the left. We've got this tree over on the right. It's a little strong. It's subdued because of the color. We could actually bring it out, but we don't want to. We don't want it to compete with the bird, which is why I was curious about putting the bird on the right side of the image. Might be a little extreme, but you know, there's sort of an unbalance about it that I kind of like. So again, this is very subjective. This is personal preference to you. And then lastly, the square. The thing about a square crop is a square doesn't have any direction to it. There's no forcing you to look at it left to right, etc., because it's square. So it's really you look right into it, and it's all about what the central figure is, in this case, the bird. All right, we got more to do. Let's move on. Any questions? Okay. You guys are quiet tonight. What else? Okay, let's look at some of the other tools. Let's do this one. I love these trees. This is, by the way, what the aspens look like in around Durango and Telluride, Colorado in the fall. It is really quite spectacular. But again, I was concerned about the sky. And if you look at the histogram, I actually have a couple of spots where the sky went pure white. Why? Well, the sun's actually behind the clouds there. So I'm going to take a pass. I'm not worried about that. But let's do the usual. Let's bring the highlights all the way down. You see there's clouds there. We'll bring the shadows all the way up. And again, little presence. This is going to get some dehaze. In fact, the sky's going to need more. But we have some color issues here because everything's kind of the same color. And again, we need to do something color-wise to fix this. First of all, the sky's still bothering me. So let's go to the mask and create a sky. I'm going to bring the exposure down on the sky. I'm going to make it bluer. Bring out the cloud. There are clouds in there. And I'm going to add some dehaze. Where'd my dehaze slider go? Under details. Nope, not under details. Effects. Let's add some dehaze. Okay, because it was a dramatic sky there. A storm had actually just passed. So now we have everything but the sky. We have these group of trees that are our subjects. How do we select them? I doubt the software is going to be able to see that as the subject. Let's see how clever Lightroom is. I don't think it's going to do it, but let's choose subject. And no, it got the trunks. We can actually use that as a starting point. So let's click on add with a brush and we'll just come in and get these trees and just point click around. And of course, we're picking up other stuff because it's very similar. So again, you hold down the Alt key, turns it to a minus, and the same thing over here. So what other tools do we have? We talked about the color mixer. We've talked about point color. Well, let's scroll down. We did our curves a bit. I think actually the curves might work again in here. So let's go to curves. So what is the opposite of yellow? Any ideas? Well, it's blue. So what happens if we choose the blue in our curve and boost that? Will that get us where we want to go? No. Do we want it to be more yellow? We could take it out. Yeah, I'm not liking either of them. We also have the targeted adjustment tool here. Let's click on that and just do a global. We can click in here and push that up. Oh, look at that. See what the curve is doing? Let's do that to separate that out. That's helping. We need some more saturation now since we've made this brighter. So let's scroll back up to saturation. Add a bunch of saturation and going to bring it up even a little more just with the exposure slider. Okay, so now we've got these trees better. We need to get back here. So again, we're going to select that mask, duplicate and invert it, which gives us, oh, I had done that with the brush. Never mind. There it is. Okay. Let me reselect that. Oop, I lost my image. Okay. Let's go back to our masks. How do I want to select that? Hmm. Let's yeah, let's duplicate and invert this mask. There we go. That gives us everything but the trees. And let's subtract the sky out of that. So subtract sky. Yeah, we've got some stuff up here. That's easy to get rid of. And I'm also going to subtract the foreground because I want to do something with that differently. So we're going to subtract with a linear gradient up into here. And then we're going to clean it up with a brush. So let's just get rid of this stuff that it picked up around the trees here. Okay, so again, we want to separate this background out. And this is one of those times where we've got the receding background. Let's add some blue to it. So let's go ahead and add blue to that. And we can bring the exposure up a little bit because it's still going to be a different color. Blue and green, the cooler colors. All right, I like it. So let's hit enter on that. The foreground now, let's hit M. I'm going to do a linear gradient here. Now, again, I want to de-emphasize this foreground compared to the trees. So we're going, excuse me, going to go back to our color temperature. Let's make that bluer and bring the exposure up. And as I look at that, do I like it? I think the whole overall image needs a little bit of yellow, a little more yellow. Let's bring back some of that blue. Let's add some contrast to it. And I think we're getting where we want to go. Now, the sky, there's too much sky. So let's hit the crop tool, maybe a little too much foreground, because again, we want to emphasize these particular aspens. And let's add a vignette. And as I do that, it makes me want to bring these up a little more again. So Shift M for a linear gradient. You can be sloppy with these. It's not as, oh, let's get rid of the sky though. We'll subtract the sky. Don't want to affect that and get that halo around there. And let's bring the exposure up. And I think we have a winner now. So let's go to full screen. There's where we ended up. That's what we started with. So we took it from there to there. Again, the whole idea with the color is it can be subtle changes, but we want to do something that's going to create more dimension. It's going to make it more three-dimensional by having the subject a slightly different tone than the background so that they separate out. All right. I want to use a couple of different tools here. I think what I'm going to do is I'm not going to bother you with I'll show you the raw edits. If anybody wants to see how I got from here to here, raise your hand. Anybody care? Or you want to save that for another time? Nobody cares. Okay. So let's just cut to the chase and go to where the color is because there's some other tools in here I want to show you. And one of them is color grading. I have to admit to not being a fan of color grading. First of all, color grading is a video term. It's not a still photography term, but it's more of a play around with kind of thing. So you can see we've got shadows, midtones, highlights, and kind of all of them at the same time. And then we have global. So if you wanted the entire image to be warmer or cooler, you can see you can just spin this around. My problem with this is it's okay if you know your image is off somehow, but you're not really sure what to do with it. You can just spin around and see if there's something that looks better. The problem is there's no way to do it locally. So you have to do the whole thing and then fix what you did locally. Now, that said, as I do this, I kind of like the warmth it did for the foreground. Let's try the shadows. The shadows need to be a little bluer. So we'll bring that down for the shadows. But it's completely screwed up the sky. So we can then go back to the sky, create a new mask of the sky, and we can bring up the exposure. It needs a lot more blue in it. We can add some saturation. In fact, what this really needs is another tool now, and that is the point color. So let's go to point color, which is down here. Click on the little eyedropper and come up to that blue and click on it. Then in here we have the color, and now we can adjust the hue, saturation, and luminance. So if we want it to be a little more warm, we can push it to the right. It makes it kind of a little deeper blue. We can make it more saturated. Well, that's a little too much. I think something like that. And by the way, this is where you're going to get in trouble with an uncalibrated monitor. You start to do stuff like this, you're judging it by what your monitor is showing you. If your monitor's not calibrated, these could be completely wrong. And then luminance, I can make it darker or lighter. I think this kind of overall needs to be a little bit lighter. So again, I wanted to show, I'm not a fan of this tool. I'm not a fan of the color grading tool here. In fact, typically what I usually do is I hide it because I don't like it. And if you find you don't like a tool, you can control click on the gray area in between the tool, go to customize develop panel, and you can turn off any of these things you don't want to use. I'm not going to use color grading. So I just turn it off, click on save, and look, it's gone. So there. I don't, again, as I mentioned, I don't really use it, but just wanted to show you it's there. Question? Yes.
Do you leave your windows open?
Do I leave my windows open? Not sure what you mean there, Paula. Tell me, explain that a little more.
Meaning you leave all your panels on the side open.
Oh, good question. Okay. Yes. The answer is no. So what Paula asked was, do I leave all of these open when I'm working on them? The answer is no, because if I also control click in here, notice there's a thing called solo mode. I'm going to turn that off. So I could open up everything, every one of these windows. And what does that mean? That means if I want to get back and forth, I got to do all this scrolling. Now, if you're okay with that, fine. I personally don't like it. What I prefer is solo mode. And if you control click and turn on solo mode, only one window will stay open at a time. As soon as you open another one, all the other windows close. So it takes up the screen and it immediately brings it to you. Personal preference, but it's there. And by the way, it's on both sides of the screen separately. So you can turn on solo mode here, yet have all your windows open here, or vice versa. Again, if I control click in here, you can see here solo mode for the left side of the screen. So that's your call. But me personally, I like to have one screen open at a time, one window open at a time, but that is an option. Let's see. Let's do let's do one more before we take five. This is in where is this? St. Augustine. And again, look at the exposure. I was all about protecting the sky, but basically pushing to the right. But if you look in here, look at the histogram up here. It's as far to the right as I could go without clipping, and there's no clipping in here. There is some pure black. If I click on here, you can see this one's lit up. What that means, somewhere in here is pure. Oh, there it is. Look where it is. It's underneath the thing. Well, guess what? It really was pure black. So let's go ahead and just bring the highlights down, bring the shadows up, and bring up the overall exposure a little bit. And let's add some contrast, and we'll add our flavorings, and we'll add vibrance and saturation. And you can see it's going to need a lot of saturation, but we need to do it locally. All right. Again, it's an improvement, but what can we do for it color-wise to make things separate out? Now, the sky will be easy to deal with. Let's just get it over with. Let's go ahead and do the sky. I'm going to make it a little bluer, but I'm going to also add a little magenta because magenta is what's going to take some of that cyan out of it. So we'll do that. We can make it a little more saturated. And what else? I don't need the point color of the curve right now. Let's add some dehaze to bring it out. Okay, might change that. Let's see what the software thinks is the subject. Is it going to pick out the pier? Odd that it picks out part of the pier. You know what? Let's leave that for now. Let's do some. Whoops, I got rid of it. Let's deal with the sand. Now, what happens in many of our images is you've got different color temperatures going on, yet your camera can only record one color temperature. So we need to override that. The sand has lost all its color. So let's hit M for our graduated gradient. And I'm going to come up into here. And since it didn't recognize these parts of the piers as the subject, we're going to have to get rid of them manually. So we'll get a brush and I can just paint over that. Again, you can see even though my circle is bigger, since I have auto mask on, it only selects things and make a liar out of me. I missed a spot, so let's bring that back in because the sand was obviously much warmer than this. So the color is off. This is why we have to do color editing. There we go. That's what it looked like. Maybe a little more magenta in there. Okay, much better. Saturation wise, yeah, that's good too. So you can see now we're starting to get some dimension because we're putting color back in. We've also got the water back here. How can we get that? Let's hit M again. I'm going to start just above the horizon and bring it down to here. We'll have some overlap. Let's subtract the sky. Let's subtract the subject since it saw a lot of this stuff as the subject. So we'll hit subtract again and choose the subject. And we're left with this part of the pier and up here. So again, subtract, brush. And this one's easy. We can just drag across this. All right, and now we got a little bit of pier way back here. So let's add some blue to the water. So we add some blue in there. And I think it needs a little magenta. There we go. That's a little darker blue. And I think I'm happy with that as far as exposure goes. I didn't make a virtual copy of that. Let's do that so I can reset one. Considering we started with that and we're here, look at how much dimension we were able to bring again from the color. We've got the warm color in the foreground going off to the cool colors in the background. Composition wise, as I looked at this, because I wasn't either the pier isn't exactly symmetrical or I was just slightly off. I should have been more careful about where I cropped this image. So I'm going to crop it more. I'm going to come right into, I think right in between, leave a little bit of sky to that part of the pier and a little bit of sky there. And I don't know if yeah, I think something's out of skew a little bit. Let's do that. I think this is a little bit too much up here. I don't think that needs to be there. Looks good, but I think the horizon's slightly off. So let's go to the crop tool, get the angle tool, and I'm just going to drag it across the horizon of the ocean here. The ocean was crooked. And there we go. And let's add a vignette to that. And as we add the vignette, I can say vignette. Let's add the vignette, but I think this needs a little bit more. I think we need to help the viewer get into here. So let's hit Shift M again. And I'm going to do it right up the middle. Be right with you, Gloria. Do I want it to affect the sky? I think maybe I do. Let's just bring up the overall exposure everywhere here. And yes, that was the answer. And let's hit enter. Does the whole thing need a little more saturation? I'm not sure. Let's take a look. Let's go to basics. Let's bring up the overall saturation more and the vibrance. And let's add a little more contrast. And I think I like that better. So once more, we've gone from here. That was our raw file. And by adjusting this color and the crop, we took it to there. Very interesting. Yes. Okay, Gloria's question.
Do you advise to make a virtual copy each time you do a final edit?
So Gloria asks, do I do a virtual copy each time I do a final edit? I do a virtual copy each time I want to change the crop. Because the beauty of the virtual copies is that you can make them whenever you like. Because remember, all of these things we're doing over here to the image aren't actually happening to the image, and they won't be built in until we export this thing. So I would still not be done with this because let's zoom in. Let's zoom in. Let's go 200%, which isn't realistic, but let's do it anyway. And if you look up in the sky, there's a little bit of grain here, just because there is. Now it's 200%, not particularly fair. Let's look at it at 100%. You can barely see it, but here's the thing. Before I go out to print, every image is going to go through this. I will go to detail. I don't know that this needs sharpening. I'll add a little bit of sharpening, but I'm going to hold down the Alt key and click on the masking slider, which turns everything white, and then drag it over to the right because I don't want the sharpening to happen on the sky because there's nothing there to sharpen. And if you sharpen the sky, it's going to get grainier. But now we have denoise, and the denoise in Lightroom is actually quite good. It's going to show us the preview window, and again, this is at 300%. So let's come up to that sky, and you can see the grain. If you click on and off it, getting a little bit of chromatic aberration there too. So then you just click on enhance. I had both images selected, so it's going to do it to both of them. But it will now create another copy, a DNG, with the noise reduction applied. That's the image I'm going to send out to be printed. And as I look at this, I kind of like it. So yeah, I'll give myself a pat on the back. I like that. It was a different edit than I had done on it before. Yep, I got a pat in the back from Diane. So virtual copies, it's personal preference. I mostly use virtual copies when I'm trying out different crops. So let's say, for example, I have this image and I want to offer this to one of my clients, like our favorite acupuncturist in town. Maybe I want to make a print for her to hang up, but since I put these in just as a favor, kind of on spec, I can't afford to get custom framing. So I'm going to make another virtual copy of this and look to see, well, what is the closest standard frame size I could actually crop this and fit it in? As I look at this, I'm going to say this kind of looks like a 4x6 shape. Nope, it's wider than that. Don't tell me it's an 8x10. I hate 8x10s. Let's see. Son of a gun. It's an 8x10. All right, fine. So I would crop it now. So now there's my virtual copies. There's the before and after. Very minor change. Strangely enough, I cropped this to pretty much an 8x10 and it was almost exact. So there's the answer. For me personally, I would like maybe a little less foreground. If I was cropping just what I thought the image needs, I would turn off the aspect ratio lock, bring this up just a little bit, something there, a little less up top, which is actually even more square than that. I like that better. But that versus that, you're getting a little more foreground, but it fits in an 8x10 frame. So I will make that compromise if I just can't afford to be putting custom framing everywhere. But for myself, I'm generally going to crop to what I feel the image needs best. Any other questions? Okay. It is 8:31. Let's just take 5. I'm just going to step up and warm my coffee because now we're going to dive into, or next, we're going to dive into the deep end of the pool and we're going to go into Photoshop. And Photoshop is where all of my pages of notes really are. So, including the big one. The big one is in Photoshop. And oh, you know what? Is there something else I need to show you here? Now, I could I? All right, I'm going to show you a first example and then I'm going to do it again. I'm going to just give you a tease. I'm going to send this into Photoshop, which is just Command or Control E. And here it is in Photoshop. You're going to want to kiss me after you see this if you've never seen this before. All right. All right. Notice when we do all of these edits that it's common to get sort of a light edge around these adjustments because of how the software is making the selections. The selections are not perfect. So we end up with these slight light areas around high contrast intersections. You can see it right here as well. So what is the answer? Well, what's going on here? This is lighter than this. Is this darker than that? I think that is too. So here's what you need to do. Get your selection lasso. I'm going to hold down the Alt key and just draw a straight line down this edge. Bring it all. In fact, I'm going to bring it all the way down here. I'm seeing it all the way down to there. And I'm going to select that much. I'm going to get the stamp tool or the cloning brush, whichever you prefer. And I'm going to set it, rather than normal, I'm going to set it to darken. And hit Alt to click where I want it to sample from. And then just drag across there. And notice that that little halo interface is gone. And I'll show you another way to use that in a couple of other images. But we've all seen this happen. And in fact, here's a darker edge. We can do this without even doing a selection, but you can still see this halo. Now, is it as bad as we're seeing it? No, we're looking at it at 200% resolution. We can even zoom in more so you can see it better. Let's do that again. I'm going to hit the S. I'm going to hit the S, hold down the Alt key. I'm going to sample from the water here. Excuse me. And I'm going to come in now. I'm going to overlap the pier here, but it doesn't matter because it's darker and it's only going to affect things that are lighter than where I sampled from. And then if I come right through here, look, I can just drag down and look how it gets rid of that. And then we look at it at 100% and everything looks pretty perfect. So That's how that works. We're going to use that some more. In fact, in the next image when we come back, we'll do that. I'm going to get a coffee refresh. I'll see you in 5 minutes. All right, so I have two things recording again. Okay, again, basics. Yeah, let's just cut to the chase, bring the highlights down, shadows up. Now, just doing that has already caused that halo effect. Look kind of at the edge of the lighthouse. It's not bad. And the weird thing is that this can actually occur in nature. It actually sometimes happens, even with your own eyes. You can take a look at this and you'll see this happening. But let's go ahead. Just the other, again, little basics. Dehaze. No, we're going to hold off on the dehaze. We'll add some vibrance and saturation. All right, now it's starting to look right. But before you get too deep into your edit, look at the image. Where do you want to go? Where are the distractions? Where are the problems? What's wrong? And for one, the sky is completely wrong in this. So let's deal with the sky first. So we'll click on the sky. And fortunately, it sees that there's a however. Look what it's done. It's picked up some of the building. It's picked up some of the lighthouse. Let's go into 50%. Yeah, let's go to 100%. Notice that it's picking up some of the white here on the lighthouse, which actually is not a problem because I'm going to adjust the sky warmth, but that would be reflecting on this bright side of the lighthouse as well as the glass in the tower. So I'm okay with that. What I'm not okay with is it doing it over here. There wouldn't be affecting that. So we need to subtract that with a brush and just go in and make sure that these things aren't being affected because there's no way the sky is going to reflect into that. I mean, would it be a terrible thing if it happened? Probably not, but it's not going to happen. So let's do that. All right, so we'll go back to fit. Excuse me. So what's the problem? Well, the color temperature is way off. This needs to be much yellower. Oh, look at that. That's better. Needs to be redder as well. Yet, because this is kind of borderline sunrise and blue hour, look at the color of the sky up in here. That's a problem. So we need to select that and bring it down. So we're going to use our M key for doing linear gradient. And I'm going to just follow that sky where it is too kind of pale, kind of almost a blue in it. And what I wanted to select is this gradient, but only where there's sky. I don't want it to affect anything else. So I click on the three dots and tell it to intersect this mask with the sky. So it's only going to select places that are both sky and the gradient. And I just love that. I did think that is so cool. And we're going to add the saturation, add some more yellow, add some more red, and it's still not cutting it for me. I want intense. That's where this little box down here comes in, the color box. And I'm going to click a red in here. Oh, there we go. Maybe a little too intense or maybe not. Actually, I kind of like it. Actually, you know what? I'm going to leave that. You can adjust it in Photoshop in a minute, but I think that's cool. You might think it's too much, but again, part of this color editing stuff is subjective. It's about the mood that you want to create. So I'm going to hit enter on that. Let's see what it thinks the subject is. Does it think the lighthouse is the subject? Son of a gun, that's pretty good. I want to add a little bit of this building right here, so I will click on add and get brush. All right. Oh, and by the way, Diane just told me what the AI thing was in the Zoom, and it's a transcription system. So it'll actually take what I'm saying and transcribe it. Now, that's an abuse of the term AI. There's nothing AI about it. Voice to text transcription's been going on for 20 years, and there was no AIs involved. So let's stop it with the overuse of the term AI when it has nothing to do with anything. All right, so what do I want to do? I want to create dimension again. I want to separate out the lighthouse from the background. So let's bring up the exposure. That's better. Let's make it a little bluer. We're going to make it a different color temperature again to separate it out. Technically, this side of the lighthouse is kind of in shade, so it would be a little bluer. That's good. And the tower still isn't cutting it for me. So I'm going to hit K and just select the tower. I want the tower to be brighter. So let's bring the tower up. Yeah, that's better. And I'm going to bring it up too much intentionally because I want to darken the side that's away from where the sun's rising over here. Let's hit K again. I'm going to make my brush smaller. And I'm going to select the left side of the tower. I'm going to click once right up here and then come down to here, hold down the shift key and click again, which gives me just that side. And we're going to bring down the exposure a little bit. And as you do that, you can decide, okay, the roof on the building needs to be a little darker. And again, we're going to take this into Photoshop, so we'll fine tune it. All right, that's looking a lot better. So yeah, you can see the halo is kind of prominent right here. Forget that for the time being. What are the other distractions? What are the problems? For one, these rocks in the foreground are way too prominent. They are distracting. So we're going to have to cut back on those. And also the color of the rocks in here is off. I think it might be time to take this into Photoshop. So let's just do it now. Command E. All right, here's our image in Photoshop. Actually, I'm going to bring in one that I had already done. Where's my Photoshop file? Right here. I'm going to open this one as well because we're going to edit the original. I have all my adjustments turned off, but I had already done some because so as a reminder of what I was after. So we've got this up here twice. And here's the other thing. When you do an edit, you come back to it the next day, you're going to end up with a different edit. So I recommend doing a finished edit, but don't consider yourself done with it. You're going to have to come back and play with it later. So, all right, time to, what do I want to start with? Let's see. Let me get my notes out because I don't want to miss anything. Okay, so first thing with Photoshop, we're going to work on layers. We're not going to work on the actual file. How many of you are not really up on layers? So you give me a hand, any hand raise? Okay, a couple. Okay. That's the beauty and the real power of Photoshop is not only layers, but how they're going to be applied to the image. So what I can do is the selection tools are very different in here. I think that the shadows in here are too dark and they seem a little yellow. So I'm going to select just the shadows. And one of the first tool we're going to use is up under select, and it's called color range. And where it says select sampled colors, I click on there and I'm going to select the shadows. And it shows you what it considers the shadows. Well, that's more than I want. I could subtract from it using these eyedroppers here, or I can bring down both the range and the fuzziness. So I'll bring down the range and the fuzziness even more. I just want the deepest shadows there, something, and you can see what it is picking there below and hit OK. And that's what it's selected. That's okay. Just let that go for a second because what we're going to do is go into levels. And down where there's this little half circle, half white, half black circle, these are adjustment layers. These will automatically create a new layer and watch what happens. I didn't have to because now I've got yeah, Diane said I didn't copy my background layer and she's right. But there was no operation right now that I'm going to do that's going to ever touch the background layer. So if I felt the need to do it, I could do it later. But all of these adjustment layers are on their own layer. And if I hold down the Alt key and click on the mask, that's what it actually is working on. So anything that is white will be affected by adjustments I do. Everything that's black won't be touched. So again, I can click on the icon and I get the normal layers thing. Now, we're used to dealing with this one up here. where we can make things lighter and darker, more contrasty. So this is what's called the input levels. If I bring the blacks up, it's not bringing the blacks up. This is left to right, pure black to pure white. If I move the black slider in, what it is now saying is, if you look at the numbers underneath, it's 0 to 255, which is 256 steps, which is 8 bits per color. There's your math lesson for the day. But by moving this slider over, what it is now doing is everything to the left of this pointer is now pure black. This is setting the pure black point. I don't want them darker, so I'm going to leave that over here. Conversely, this is the white point. It's all the way over on the right. If I were to bring it down, I could make everything that's to the right of the white arrow go pure white. That's what that does. The middle one is the midtone. Now, contrary to what you'd think, if I drag this over to the right, it makes everything darker. It makes the midtones darker. Why? Because we're saying this is now 50% instead of here. If I bring it the other way, it makes the midtone be much darker, so all of those midtones get dark. The one that is seldom used is this one below. This one does just the opposite. This is saying white and black, but it is saying what is the blackest black and what is the whitest white. So if I've got something that's pure black and I want to bring them up a little bit, I can just bring this up. Here, I'll let you see what happens. You see it turns the blacks to gray, but I don't want them to be 0. I want it to be maybe around 10. And what that's going to do is make them not quite pure black. It's a subtle thing, but it's actually important. And I can turn this on and off and you'll see, let me zoom in a little bit. So let's zoom in on the rocks. You can see the before and after. The blacks, the shadows opened up just a little bit. That's what I was after for that. All right, let's do another one. Let's go to curves. Now here's our friend, the curves again. Let's go to full screen. Curves are powerful in Photoshop, and you've got a lot of different options here. You've got this flying fickled finger of fate thing here, which is the adjustment layer dot that was in Lightroom. And we've got basically a recreation of the histogram here. This is midtones, 3/4, 1/4, and then black and white. I'm going to just click on this line and add dots. If I decide I want to bring up the midtones, I can do that. And I can darken my shadows. I don't want to do that. And I can bring up the highlights. Now, if I wanted to darken this a little bit, this is a very slight S curve. That will actually add contrast to the image. And if I click on the before and after, it actually does a nice job on the foreground, but it makes the sky too bright. Again, that's the beauty of the masks, because if I click on the background and tell it just like I would in Lightroom, select the sky. Now the sky is selected. I can click on the mask for this curve. I've got to put black in the foreground, so I'll hit the little arrow there, or you can hit the X key. And Alt Backspace will fill with the foreground color, in this case black, and it puts that in the mask. So now if I deselect this, hold down Alt, there's what it just did. There's my mask. So the curve is now being mostly stopped from affecting. So now if I turn this off, look what that just did to the foreground. It added some nice contrast, and then we just masked out the sky. This is where the power of Photoshop shows up in these tools. Is there more we could do with the mask? Sure. Because we're doing it globally, RGB, we could also do it individually. So for example, let's see. I'm going to pull out some, actually, nope, before I do that, I'm going to duplicate this layer. I'm going to make another copy of it. 2 ways to do that. It's Command J, or drag it to the little plus box. It's just go with Command J, but if you don't remember it, and I actually made a second copy. Like maybe you liked the first one and you thought, well, what if I add to it? Because it's adding on top of it. And you might decide, that's a little much, but I kind of like what it did. So you can come over here to opacity and bring the opacity down. Let's make it 50% or so. Now when I turn it off, I think I actually like that a little better. I like what it did, added that little contrast in the foreground. And again, since we have our mask, it's not affecting the sky. So you have individual controls over color in the mask as well. If I decide I want, oh, let's say I want to increase the reds in the sky. Oops, let's create another mask. Let's just do another one. I'm going to create another curves panel, and I'm going to make this red. And I want to bring the reds up. Oh, look what it did to the sky. That's cool. Just by pushing that up a little bit. Love it. That's the color I want. However, of course, it's messed up the rest of the image. But remember, we had a mask here before. If I hold down the Alt key, rather than selecting the sky again, I can hold down the Alt and click on the mask below, drag it above, but it did just the opposite of what I wanted. It made the red on the foreground rather than on the sky. So all I need to do is click on the mask and Command or Control I, which is invert. And now, if I Alt click on the mask, now that's the mask. So now if I turn this on and off, you can see it did that nice addition to the sky color and left the foreground alone. So if we turn all of these, what we've done so far, off, there's where we started. And look what we've got. So let me zoom out a little bit. Pays to back off every once in a while. Let's see. Do I like the foreground? You know what? As I'm looking at this, I turn this off. I want to darken this foreground a little bit. So let's do a levels again. I'm going to do levels. And I'm going to darken the foreground. In fact, I'm going to bring the whites down. I'm going to really make it darker. But we're not really going to do it. Okay, again, remember, we're working on layers. The mask is another layer. I'm going to do a gradient on this mask to stop it from coming through. Gradient is the G key. Unlike Lightroom and Photoshop, the tools generally have the first letter. Now, if you haven't done this before, there's classic gradients. If you click on here, you'll get all these different colors, but the one you're going to use the most is this middle one. And the checkerboard means it's going from the color, in this case, the foreground, to transparent. That's what we want. So I'm going to hit OK there. And I'm going to draw a gradient from here, I think down to, let's go down to there. And if I hold down Alt and click on the mask, that's what I just created. So now I've darkened the foreground. It's too much, though. That's okay. You can always do it as too much and just bring the opacity of the mask down. Now, I like what it's done for the stones, but I think it's made the water here a little too dark. So I can click on the mask again and paint on it just as if it was a regular layer, because it really is. So I'm going to get a brush, and I'm going to paint with white because I'm painting on the mask. So, and I'm going to change. Oh, how do you guys change brush size in Photoshop? How many of you use brackets? Anybody? Brackets? Yes, we got people using brackets. You're never going to use brackets ever again. How many of you are Windows users, not Mac? Hands for Windows users? All right, I'll talk slower. Sorry, I just had to do that. On a Macintosh, here's what you do. You get any brush, any of the tools that are brush, could be a stamp tool, brush, etc. On a Mac, you hold down Control-Alt and click. Drag left and right, and it makes the brush bigger or smaller. Drag up and down, and it makes the hardness change. No, so I'm going to make this 100%. I'll make this brush 100%. So when I click, so there you can see it. Just hold down those two keys. On a Windows machine, it's Control right click. And as I go up and down, you can see it changes the edge hardness. So a lot faster way of doing it than trying to do brackets. Also, for opacity, you don't ever have to touch this. If you want to work it like 20%, just hit the 2 on your keyboard. Watch the opacity number. When I hit 2, it just changes to 20%. And this is cumulative. So if let's do 50%. I'm painting, I've got the mask selected. I'm going to paint in here just to start to bring that up. In fact, let's go to 70. I really don't need that in there. And let's look at the mask. You can see, yeah, you can't really see it that well, but see, I'm painting in it. That's what it's doing. And that's what happens if you actually paint on a layer. Don't want that. All right. What else do I want to do? This part of the sky is a little too bright for me. Let's click on the background again and go to color range again. Now let's choose the highlights and see what it picks up. And you can see it picks up most of the sky. I'm going to bring the range down and the fuzziness. Yeah, I'd say about that area up there is what's a little bit too bright for me. But don't get confused by what it selects, because it selects at the 50% point. So it's actually more than that. And I'm going to use, let's see, curves or levels. Let's use levels. And I'm just going to, you could say I could darken that so I could make it actually dark. I just want to bring it down. I just want to take a little of the heat off of it just to make it blend in a little bit better. And we just did that to that. Perfect. I think this area here is a little bit too dark. This rock is a little too colorful for me. So let's deal with those. We're going to do burning and dodging. To do that, you create a new layer, and a new layer is just this thing. That's a mask, sorry. The box with the plus in it. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to fill this layer with 50% gray. So I go to fill, 50% gray. Now it's an option, so there must be a reason for it. And I'm going to put it up on the top of the image. Okay, there's our 50% gray layer. What I'm going to change is here, it's called the blending mode. I'm going to change it from normal to overlay. Now notice when I turn it on and off, nothing's happening. You can't see it. The way an overlay layer works, anything that's 50% gray is transparent to the layer below. Anything that's lighter will lighten the layer below. Anything that's darker will darken the layer below. The reason for filling it with gray is so you can see where you've painted with light. Because if you don't do this, you don't have to do this, but if you don't do it, you can't see where you painted with light. So I thought that this was a little bit too dark through here, and that this might be a little too light. So I'm going to get a brush, hit B, and I'm going to work at a low number. I'm going to go to, just 10%. So I hit 1 on my keyboard, and I'm going to start painting through here. And the interesting thing is it's cumulative. And if I change the overlay back to normal so you can see, there's all I've done. I just added that little bit of light there. Now, conversely, I'm going to hit X, which will put black in the foreground, and I want to darken that. And this you can see happening a little better. I'm going to darken these rocks a smidge. Make my brush a little smaller. Just in some. Now, the spots that are facing the sun, they can stay bright. All right. Now, this one I thought was a little too dark also, so we're going to darken that. We're also going to desaturate that because that rock's bothering me. Okay. I turn this on and off, and you can see, look at the difference. Look how it's changed where you look. Now, this thing's still bothering me, so we're going to do another adjustment layer, which is hue saturation, and I'm going to bring the saturation way down. And all I'm looking at is this rock. And I'm going to bring the lightness down too. I want that rock to look like that. Oh, by the way, if you didn't like using the sliders, here's this finger. You can click on there and drag it left and right, and it will do the saturation thing for you. All right. So obviously I don't want this to happen everywhere. So I'm going to click on the mask, hit X to put black in the foreground, and Alt backspace again. Now I've completely filled the mask with black. Now I'll hit X and get a brush again. And I'm going to paint it, 50%. And let this start to come through here. Maybe even 70%. And again, the beauty of this is it's cumulative. You can just keep painting over it. And honestly, as I look at it, there's too much foreground. This needs to be cropped. But let's say I want some of these rocks. All right, we're going to do a heavy duty Photoshop thing. And yes, by the way, there's too much sky. And did I overdo it with the saturation of the sky? Maybe, but I'm not worried. I just to show you the tools mostly. All right, we're going to do something cool here. We're going to create a stack. I'm going to take all of these layers and flatten them, but maintain the layers. How do you do that? This little 3 lines here is the layer menu. I'm going to click on that. Now, if I were to tell it to merge visible, it just flattens the image and we lose all the layers. I might want those later, particularly with the sky. I might bring the sky down a little bit. So what you do is hold down the Alt key when you do this. I'm holding down the Alt key. Nothing changes on the menu, so it can be confusing. Click on Merge Visible, and look, you get a flattened version of it, but you still have all your layers and masks because we might want to use these again. Here's what I want to do. I want to do 2 things with this. One, I want to compress the foreground a little bit. So I'm going to hit the M key, the marquee tool, and select the bottom of the image. I may want some of these rocks to just be in the frame a little bit, but the problem is the water here, the height of it is as tall as the lighthouse. I want to compress that a little bit. So I'm going to use one of my favorite tools, which is Content Aware Scale. Hold down the Shift key and bring that up. And look what it's doing. It's compressing that foreground. It's almost as if I was able to go down and lay down on the rocks, which is how this would have happened. So I hit enter on that. You got to hold down the shift to just have it go one direction. So now if I close all these other layers, you can see there's the image now, rather than that. It's compressed the foreground, which is a very handy tool. Let's see, saturation up. We're going to save that for another image. I could continue forever on this. I think I do want to do a final crop. Let's bring this back in. Now I am going to crop this. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to leave it there because I generally save my crop for Lightroom as well as my vignette and any kind of final tunings. So let's just hit save. Oh, but I forgot to do something. You forgot to tell me. Let's zoom in to these edges and see what's going on. Yeah, we got a little orange in there, but look at the halos we've got. You see them right here? Again, this is at 259%. Is it going to show up in a print? Maybe not. But let's get rid of them anyway. So the stamp tool, again, which we used before, there it is. The S is the keyboard shortcut for it. And since we left it there, now if I make it normal and I hold down Alt and start clicking on here, it just notice it just starts painting and I'm at 80%. So that's why it's not completely opaque. But if I change it to darken, excuse me, it's only going to affect the color underneath it if it is lighter than what I'm sampling from. Now, in this case, the roofs are much darker than the sky, so I don't have to do any selections ahead of time. So I'm going to click on Alt, which just sampled the brush in here, and I'm going to just drag across, and look, the halos go away. Like we did before, if I hit Alt, click on one end, and come to the other end and hold down the Shift key, it draws a straight line, all these roof lines. In fact, I can just go all the way up and all the halos will go away. We've all run into these halos because of the way the softwares do their selections. They automatically, the selections are not sharp. There's times when you can do a better selection manually with the magic wand tool or with the pen tool. That saves you from having to do this, but here's the solution. And if you weren't familiar with this, you just got your money's worth for tonight. Because now they're all gone. All right, let's back off to 100%. And so he just did that in here. I'll turn this on and off, and you can, let me zoom in a little bit so you can see it better. So there's our halos, and there they're gone. So that's the easiest way to get rid of halos. Oh, we've got one here too. We can't leave this. So again, sample, roof, and we'll do it here as well. All right. And again, what is this? This is 300, we're looking at this at 300%. So at 100%, everything looks fine. This is a little rough here, but I'm not worried about it right now. All right. Let's send this back into Lightroom now. So I just hit Command S. And we'll go jump back into Lightroom. Wait for it to draw in. And here's our image with the double foreground. Let's hit the crop tool, which is R. Bring that up to the compressed foreground. Bring that down. By the way, lighthouses are one of those times where having your horizon in the dead center works, because the lighthouses kind of pierce into the sky and bring the sky and the sea together. So it actually does work. Let's hit effects. And one last thing, this is something that Lightroom just does better. If I want to create a visual path up to the lighthouse, since the sun is coming in from the right, I'll do that. Subtract the sky and bring up the exposure a bit on that. In fact, I'm going to bring it in from the left a little bit, just a little more than I need. Oh, look at that, lined right up on my golden ratio grid. So let's reset the original one. So that took a while, but we took this raw image and added dimension with color and light to turn it into that. Is it super saturated? Yeah, it is. If you don't like it, you can just turn the saturation down. And just as an example, this is something you might want to use the virtual copies for. So if I hit 1, 2, 3, I'll make some virtual copies again. I can just select the sky and bring down the saturation a bit. If you prefer, I can even make it darker. The problem is now I've created new halo effects over here, which would have to be edited, but get as close in Lightroom as you can to the way you want your final image to be, because if not, you're going to end up having to re-edit things that you had already done, like this, and I'll bring the exposure down on that. And again, to taste, to flavor it to taste, if you like that a little better. That was a lot. Any questions? Diane just left, so hold on. Let's move along to something that you guys want to see a portrait edit? Anybody? Yes? No? Yes? Okay, yes to a portrait. Let's do a portrait. I haven't done any portraits in a while. So let me go back to my collections. Portraits, let's see. Yeah, let's do this one. Okay. So again, our basics in Lightroom. Skin color can be a problem. And this was very, very flat light. I look at the histogram. I was concerned apparently about saving the highlights in the background, but it made everything dark. So let's start by bringing that up. But you can see it's still kind of lifeless. So let's bring up the shadows. And texture we're not going to deal with in for sharpening. Texture was actually what I was told originally designed to actually smooth skin. So we're going to save that separately. We'll bring up the vibrance because that's going to bring up, see, the desaturated skin without messing with the skin tones. Overall saturation, maybe a little bit. So what has happened? It's okay, but we need to do stuff that Photoshop is best at. One thing I will do first, though, is I'll get the brush, K. We've got auto mask on. I am going to use, I'm just clicking rather than dragging because I don't want to get everywhere. And this is Juliana, by the way. I worked with her a lot in the past. Lovely young lady. And I'm going to take away this. Now she looks like she's ready for Wicked. All right. This is where I'm going to use texture, but I'm going to bring it down instead because texture is a great skin smoother. So if I were to zoom in, let's go to zoom in closer. Look at the effect that texture has. There's with the texture on. There's, whoops, let's hide that. Watch how the skin smooths you can see it in here. It softens, does a great job on skin while not being destructive. If any of you ever did portrait photography in the past, one of the problems with cameras today is they're too sharp. Every little pore shows up. In the day, we used to either stretch a nylon stocking over the front of the lens, or we'd put a filter on and put some Vaseline around the edges to get things softer. So now you can do it this way. That said, though, the eyes are kind of dark. The lips have lost some of their color. The hair versus the skin tone is still off somehow. Could we do this in Lightroom? Yeah, but this is something better done in Photoshop. So let's send this into Photoshop, Command E. All right, so here she is in Photoshop. I'm going to make a extra copy of that. I just hit Command J. And let's zoom in a bit. So my first concern is the skin. I'm not thrilled with the skin color. So let's hit K. Not K, we're in Photoshop now. It's got to be a brush. Actually, you know what? Let's try the magic wand tool. And I do want anti-alias. And I do want contiguous. So let's click in there. And okay, so now I need to hold down the shift key to add to that. And the problem is her hair is very close to her skin color. So we're going to have to manually get rid of that. And I want to get in underneath her eyebrows as well. You know what? Never mind. I'm not going to do it that way. We're just going to do it and then mask it back in. It'll be easier. So here's the tool we're going to use for this. And we're going to use this again on our next landscape shot, color balance. So color balance, the greatest tool if you think there's a color problem, but you're not sure what it is. You're not sure how to deal with it. That's this tool. Instead of just having the two sliders, now you've got three sliders and separated out from midtones, highlights, and shadows. So you're not sure. Well, let's just start dragging stuff. I'm going to drag it to cyan, and all I'm looking at is the skin. And I think the skin is a little too red, so I'm going to back off just a little bit into cyan. Then we'll do magenta green, actually a very little bit of green. And again, it's not adding green, it's cutting out magenta. Yellow, blue, it needs a little yellow. All right, let's move on to highlights. Same thing. No, actually needs some red in the highlights. No, no. If they're both no's, that means that the balance between those two colors is okay. Yellow, oh yeah, definitely needed yellow. Brightening, now things are starting to brighten up. And then shadows, definitely not cyan. Maybe a very little bit of red. Magenta green, actually needs a little green in the shadows. No, maybe not. Less than that. And then yellow, blue, yellow, blue. Technically, it needs a little bit of blue. All right, so let's turn this on and off. And you see, look how it's, now the skin is great. Let's hit Command 0 to go to full screen. Problem is I like her hair beforehand. So what do? We get a brush. Put black in the foreground with the X key, and we're going to paint on the mask. I'm set at 70%. That's probably a good start. So let's just paint with black. Actually, it can go to the background. That's fine. All these spots. And if we alt-click on the mask, you can see there's where we worked. I can get the rest of the background here. I know that's safe. And by the way, after you do this, if you decide, gee, I want everything just to be darker, you can do adjustments on the masks just like you would anything else. And I can use the keyboard shortcuts, but if I go to any of the adjustments that I want to do, rather than do another adjustment layer, I can use the keyboard shortcut. So for levels, it's Command L. And if I want the blacks to be darker, see, I can just drag the levels to that. All right, so now if I turn this on and off, notice just her skin is getting affected, and that looks so much better. Now we need to open up the eyes. So we're going to do that same thing we did with the landscape. We're going to create a blank layer. I'm not going to bother filling it with gray. And I'm going to set it to overlay. So X for white, get a brush. Let's make the brush smaller. And I just want to work it, 20%. So, oh, look what that did. Look what that did. Look at how that opens up her eyes. Same thing above the eye and underneath the eyebrow. Not that one. You don't want to do it too much though, because it'll start to look weird. And I'm going to do another one. We're going to do a hue saturation. And I'm looking at her eyes. Actually, I should probably select it first because it'll look weird on the whole image. Let's do this first. I'm going to select in the eye. So I'm going to paint at 80%. And if I alt click on here, you can see there's what I've got. I've got a mask in there. And what I want is actually the opposite of that. So remember that Command I is the inverse. Now, if I go into here and bring up the saturation, you can see I can go weird to black and white. So I'm going to bring up the saturation a little bit and push it a little more towards the blue. And while we're at it, just a little trick for any kind of blemishes or imperfections. I'm going to go back to our layer 1 here, and I'm going to get the lasso tool, which is this. And I'm just going to select areas that, because of the light direction, created more of a shadow than maybe was necessary. Anywhere else? Maybe right there and right there. Up and right there. That's good. And I'm going to use Edit, Content Aware Fill. Yep, it's telling where it's going to sample from. I'll just hit OK. And Command D to deselect, and they're all gone. If I turn it on and off, you can see the before and after. Now, in here, we've got a little bit, I don't know if it's because of her makeup, but we've got some darkness in there that's kind of prominent. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take this image again. I'm going to make another copy of it. And we're going to run another filter under blur called surface blur. And 1324 was always my default. And I can see that this has gone really blurry. I'm actually going to increase the radius and the threshold a little more. Going to make it even blurrier. Hit OK. Now, do I want her all that blurry? No, of course not. First of all, I'm going to create a mask, and I'm going to want to paint back in. If you want to create a mask that's already black, hold down the Alt key on anything that doesn't automatically create a mask and click on the mask, which is this thing, and it automatically fills it with black. Now I can get a brush with white, and I'll work at, say, 40% and start painting in here to just smooth these areas. And as I'm looking at it, I'm going to get a white brush again and just lighten that up a little more. There we go. There we go. All right, there we go. So, oh, you know what? As I'm looking, let's talk about color again. I can't remember what color she was wearing, but let's add a little more hue saturation adjustment for the lips. I'm just going to zoom in, put it right next to it. I'm going to add saturation. Yeah, I think that's much better. Color's okay. And now this automatically creates a mask, so we have to Alt backspace it to fill it with black, and then get our white brush again, and I'll work at 40%, and I'll just start painting just over the lips to bring that color out. And I think that's pretty good. So we started with that after our Lightroom edits, and we brought it to there. Looks a lot better. From there to there. And I'd probably send that back into Lightroom and put a vignette on it or what have you. All right. Any questions? If not, I will. Okay, let's move on. Let's go back to our landscapes. Somebody asked about red rock stuff. Was that tonight? Was that for tonight? Oh, that was the other night. Okay. Ooh, let's do this one. Yeah, we'll do this. No, we'll do this. Okay. All right. It's a place called Wilson Arch in Utah, and this is the raw file. So I'm going to make a virtual copy of it and do the basics real quick. This needs a lot of color help, though, to create some motion from the foreground to the background. So I brought up the shadows, bring down the highlights, and open up the exposure a little bit, and it's kind of flat. So we'll add texture, clarity, a little dehaze. There's a deep blue sky here. Let's go ahead and take advantage of that. And then some overall saturation. So whenever I'm with people out in the field, the one thing I always tell them is stare at the stuff you're photographing before you leave the space, because there's many color temperatures in this image and your camera can only do one. So what we've ended up happening is there are spots where the color is good, and then there are spots where it's bad. I don't like any of the mid-ground for color there. And even the blue sky is off. Let's fix that first. We don't have to select the sky. It's the only thing that's blue. So let's go to the color mixer and choose the point color tool. So we'll click on that, come up into there, and you see this palette of colors that are near what the color was. You can see the blue is edging over towards the cyan a bit. It should be warmer because it's a different color temperature. To get it warmer, we just push it towards the magenta, and that looks better. Now, it's also a little dark when I do that, so let's just bring up the luminance, and I think I want the saturation even a little more. Maybe not quite that much. You know what? Hold that thought. We're gonna leave it there. I like the sky up top and that down the bottom. The foreground is easy to fix. It's too yellow. So let's go back to our masking panel when you're going to use a linear gradient, which is M. And I'm going to just drag up to here. It's gone too yellow. We want to separate this out. See, if I bring this down, it has the effect of taking out the saturation of that area. I can make it a little more interesting with some contrast, but that's looking better already. The midtones are what are giving me the biggest fits. We've lost the greens in the trees, and I don't know what color these things should be. Unfortunately, I don't remember. But let's hit our brush. Let's get, these are junipers. Yeah, we got some of the canyon back there. I'm going to add these into the mix, and that thing right there, and then hold down the Alt key to get rid of this. All right, so let's add some blue and some green. There we go. They look much better. Now these things are still bothering me. This is too bright, and the orange under the arch isn't quite bright enough. Now I want to take this into Photoshop to finish it off. The problem is there are certain things that Lightroom does better as far as the intersections with masks. It just makes things easier. So I'm going to select the sky. There's our sky. But now I'm going to intersect this with a linear gradient because I want the sky down the bottom to be lighter. So I've got my gradient tool and I'm actually going to bring it up to there and then lighten it up and watch what happens. Now we get a gradient in the sky from light at the horizon, which is what it does, up to there. And I'm going to adjust exactly where it is. Even bring it up a little more. Okay. Even though it showed all the way down here, it wasn't using that because it's only the intersection of the sky. All right, so I think we're in pretty good shape except for this orange. Let's go ahead and get that with a brush. I'll just single click on here and let's add some yellow back into that. Be a little red. And I think that's orange enough. All right. The color in here, I'm confused about. I'm not sure exactly what this thing needs. Let's send this into Photoshop. Command E. All right, here's our image in Photoshop. And as Diane mentioned earlier, I didn't make a copy of the background. Command J, so that I always have a pristine background to go to. So I'm going to zoom into this midground, which I don't exactly like the color. And when you don't exactly like the color, this is where color balance comes in. So let's do the color balance tool. And I'm looking over here. I'm not even looking at the rest of the image. And let's go back and forth and see what it needs. It definitely doesn't need red. It's too red. So let's take out some red with cyan. Magenta, green, magenta, green. Yep, needs a little bit of green. Yellow, no. Blue, definitely. Look at this rock down here in particular. Look how much better it's starting to look. So now let's move up to the highlights. Same thing. In fact, I'm going to use this rock as my judgment rock here. Let's see, a little bit of cyan in that. Green, magenta. No, neither of those work. So that means that's fine. Yellow, blue. Need some blue. And then lastly, shadows. Do we want red shadows? No. Do we want cyan? Yeah, a little bit. Ooh, needs magenta. Interesting. But look what that did. That really helps. All right, we need some magenta in the shadows, which is actually unusual. And then blue or yellow. A little bit subjective at this point. Probably really doesn't need anything. But now if I turn this on and off, look at the foreground. That makes sense to me. So let's hit Command 0. The problem is it's messed up the rest of the image. And as I look at it backing off, it's a little too much. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to fill the mask again with black. Hit X, black's in the foreground. Alt backspace, we fill it with black. Let's get a brush. And let's paint with white. We'll put white in and let's work at, say, 50% and just go through these areas that were bothering me. Make it a little smaller. And we're just bringing those back in to fix that. And I think that looks a lot more realistic. Now, the one other thing that's bothering me are these things. It's just a little too bright for me. So how do we fix that? We're going to use our friends, the output levels again for that. So we go to levels and I'm just going to bring down the whites here a little bit. I just want to bring them down a smidge because they were white, but I just want to take a little bit of the heat off of them. All right. And what I could do, rather than I could select it with the magic wand, which would probably be the easiest, or we could try to select again the highlights using our color range tool. And look at that. It picked out the highlights and look, it actually picked the rock out for us. That was handy. Let's hit OK. There it is. So I can come to the levels here, hit X, Alt backspace. Now it just masked out what I wanted. See, there's what it's got. I need to invert that. So Command I. There's what we wanted. And there's our mask. So you can see if we turn it on and off. That's too much as I look at it. which is fine. Let's just bring down the brightness. And by the way, if you don't want something to be completely opaque, you have the opacity, but you also, we didn't go in deep into blending modes. Look at all these things. So what happens if we choose luminosity and adjust that up and down? Yeah, that really isn't going to help us. We'll stick on normal for this one and just bring the opacity down a bit. In fact, as I do that, I'm going to bring the levels down a little more. Just want to darken those up. All right, Command 0. And what else do I think this needs? It needs some direction. We need to help the viewer get up to the arch. So let's create another layer, and we're going to change it again to overlay. And I'm going to get a big brush like that, and I'm going to set it for 10%. Notice opacity just changed to 10. And let's just start painting on here. Make it a little smaller. Just in the spots that are already a little bit on the light side. And then I'm going to hit X to give us black, and I'm going to go to 20% because I have some of the darker areas here are on the side. I want them to be darker, including our little friends over here who got a little bright on us. And anything that is leading you out of the image. Notice over here, we've got kind of leading things that have a tendency to take us out, including even this plant here. Now, does it look like I've done much to it with that little bit of light painting? But look at the before and after. If I turn this on and off, look at how it completely changes the direction of the light. Notice now you're looking here, where here you were looking everywhere but here. You're looking at all these bright things. By just burning, a little bit of burning and dodging. What else would I do with this? To create a little more motion in it, I would crop it. So let's hit Save, Command S. Bring this back into Lightroom. Oops. Let's hit crop. What do I think? I think this is looking 4:6 shape to me. I think that's enough of a crop. I think something like that. So again, I always do my crop and my vignette. No matter how much editing in Photoshop I do it in Lightroom. Why? Because nothing's really happening. Then again, there's my vignette. Because if I decide I want to change the crop, let's say I want to see what it looks like as a legal size print, because I have legal paper from one of my inkjets. If I go to the cropping tool and say really tall and skinny, which that's weird, it's gone. Okay, let's enter a custom crop, which is 14 by 8.5, which is legal size. Hit OK, and there we go. And the cool thing is, when I hit enter, that my crop follows my vignette follows the crop. So from there to there. I like that even better. Why? Because it's creating more motion. In fact, if I hit the R key, I might even come a little closer, cut off a little bit. One thing you want to be careful about in your compositions is you don't want to have a leading line go exactly into a corner. So like right there. If you crop that way, notice this going right exactly to the corner. This has a tendency to lead you out of the image. It's important that when you do this, that you don't have any of those lines going exactly into the corner. And then we end up with that, and I like it. So again, let's reset. So there was our raw file that we started with. No dimension to it, just very flat. And we took that to there. And remember, we cooled off. We took away the saturation of this foreground, which even though the foreground element is important, this tree branch here is very important because it gives you something to land on and leads you into the image. But by taking away its color and putting the green back in the juniper and the orange in the arch, you get to see where the eye is drawn. to here. So you'll start here, but you immediately go up to here. Now, I still don't like this thing. It's how it was. Could I fix it? Would I fix it? Honestly, I probably would. I'd probably go into Photoshop and add some of this texture into there to finish this off before having it printed. But again, that's a personal preference. I would do that before making a print. I would go ahead and paint this in here. In fact, you want to see if Lightroom can do it? Sure, Joe, I'd love to. Let's see. Let's see if Lightroom can fix this with its new quote unquote AI tool. So I'm going to get here, the AI tool. I'm going to select around this thing. So we're not documenting the fact that this thing had an arch. Let's hit remove and see what it does. See if it comes up with something that makes this work better. Just from a creative point of view, wow, that's better. Let's see, that's one. Two completely gets rid of it. Three gets rid of it too. That's too much. I think the first one works really well. So, oops. So, yeah, there's the answer. That one little spot there, I know is driving you nuts. You weren't admitting it, but that looks better because we went from there now. One more time, we went from there, and yeah, this does have to go. It's got to go, and it put a nice little piece of rock in there. And who knows, maybe someday it will really look that way. All right. Any questions on that one?
Here's a question, not on that particularly.
Yes.
Have you done anything with reflection removal tool in Camera Raw?
Reflection removal tool in Camera Raw. Yeah, that's one of the new AI tools. That's beyond the scope of what we're doing tonight. I've had limited success with it though. I kind of personally prefer doing it manually. But if you want to get into that kind of advanced image editing, where that plus the neural filters that are in Photoshop, which are pretty cool, I'd be happy to do that. But that is a subject for another day. Yeah, it's hit. Personally, I think it's hit or miss. Can you guys go a little longer? Anybody have to get to bed? All right, let's go a little longer because I got a couple more things I want to show you. Okay, let's do it. We're going to do something cool, something I haven't shown many people lately. All right, I've already done the basic edits here because I'll create. Let me hear. I'll do a reset. You don't need to see the basics every time. That's what the raw image looked like. We've taken it to here so far. It still needs life. So what does it need? I think the foreground needs to be lightened up a bit. Let's choose the sky and invert that. So we'll invert that mask. Let's bring up the exposure a little bit. That's better. And let's add a little dehaze. However, what I really want to do for this, to really add life to it, is I want to send it into Photoshop. This is a very cool thing you can do to improve the color in your images. The weird thing is we're going to do it with a black and white mask. If you've ever heard of luminosity masking, we're going to do that now. So here's what we do. Click on your adjustment layers, and we're going to choose black and white. And you get a black and white image. Now, if you want things lighter or darker, you can adjust these color sliders because they're going to affect, even though it's underneath, it's showing you black and white, it knows what was red, green, and blue. So if I want to lighten up the foreground, I can do that. If I want to darken the sky and I'm not sure what to do, you've got the pointer finger here. I can bring this up to the sky and you can see it's mostly the blue. So that would make the sky darker. The foreground, let's see. Let's bring that up a little bit. And we also have, if you click on where it says custom, you've got infrared, red, yellow, etc. Now, for anybody that ever shot black and white, we were always putting yellow or red or orange filters over to add more contrast. So if we do an orange, that's cool. Or yellow, let's see what a red looks like. It'll be a little, no, it doesn't really change it much. I like that. I want the sky darker. So let's bring the sky down. And okay. And you're thinking, well, that's fine, Joe. What does that have to do with color? This is where the blending mode comes in. So what we just did was we adjusted the luminosity. We made the foreground brighter than it was, tonally wise, black and white. We made the sky darker. So let's click on where it says normal, and we're going to change it to luminosity. So let's come all the way down. And yeah, it's weird. Stay with me. We're going to bring the opacity down. And look when I turn this, look what it's done. Now, you might decide you don't like it. So you can always go back and decide, well, let's just go with a straight yellow filter and you get to see it as it's happening. Or infrared. Let's see what that looks like. Oh, I kind of like infrared. And we turn it on and off. You can see now it's added some life to the colors. We also have the ability with our color balance friend. Let's go ahead and select the sky. All right. Now in Photoshop, to get the opposite of that, you actually have, it is hidden somewhere, but the easiest thing to do is, remember Command I was invert. We don't want that because that would create a negative of it, which is kind of freaky. It's Command Shift I is invert. And notice we now have the foreground. So if I select that first and now choose color balance, now I can start messing with these and it's not going to touch the sky. So if I decide, all right, let's see, a little red, magenta, no, it needs a little green. Yellow, no. Blue, yes. Let's try highlights. Cyan, needs a little cyan. And we're not done with this. We're going to do a couple of other things. Yellow, ooh, it's kind of making the sun look like the sun's out more. And then let's see, a little red on the shadows. And again, this is somewhat subjective. It's the mood that you want to choose. I'll make it a little yellow. All right, so we still have this mask going. Let's go to curves. And I'm going to create an S curve. So I'm going to push up the middle. I'm going to bring down the shadows. That's making this a little bit messy. So I'm going to back off on the opacity of that. I affected the sky too when I did that. Actually, in that case, it worked fine for the sky, so we'll leave it alone. Let's add some brightness contrast. Let's add some oh yeah, contrast. Do we need brightness? Yeah, we'll need some brightness too. But I don't want the sky to brighten in this case. But remember, we have this mask still sitting on this color balance layer, which is that thing. And all we have to do is hold down Alt and drag the mask to that brightness contrast layer, and it adds it. So now it's only affecting the foreground. And look how much pop that added from that to that. I know you're all saying cool. I can hear it. I don't see your mouths moving, but you're thinking it, that was cool. Creating a black and white layer and changing it to luminosity and then bringing the opacity of that layer down can create really cool pop to your images that aren't easily done other ways. Yes, dear.
Do you always start midtones, color balance?
So Paula asked, do I always start with color tones when or midtones when I do the color balance? The answer is yes. Does it matter? No. Why do I start? Because that's where it always presents it to you. It always starts off with midtones. So personally, I've always found that midtone highlights shadows works. Try it another way if you like. Certainly nothing wrong with that. While we're here, since this is one of my favorite tools, is Photoshop's ability to do a really nice job of burning and dodging. There is a burning and dodging tool, which is right over here. It doesn't work very well. So I recommend not using it. For me, create a new layer. I'm going to fill it. I'm going to fill it again with gray. I'll go fill 50% gray, which is where we were last time, and then change it to overlay and then get my brush. So I want to guide this. I want to guide you kind of in here. This has gotten a little light for me. I don't think it's the biggest subject of the thing. So let's hit B. I'm going to paint, I'm going to be very gentle with it. I'm just going to hit one and paint at 10% on some of these corners, on these areas that I want to de-emphasize a little bit, like right in here. Actually makes the shadows a little darker, actually works. And this thing back here has gotten a little bit light. Let's darken that a little bit. And even some of these highlights in the corners. And then while I'm at it, actually I'm going to select the sky again. And Command Shift I to select that, because if I leave that on while I'm painting in the layers, I don't have to worry about hitting the sky. So I'm going to continue painting with dark on the shadow sides through the canyon. I'm looking for where it's already dark, some of these spots. And let's see, a little smaller there. Let's darken the shadows. I'm adding contrast to this area here. And then I can hit X with the white and add some white. And since I had already selected this, notice even though I'm painting on the right side of this thing, it's not hitting the sky because I had already selected the foreground. And these are kind of interesting. And this is still a little dark, so I go back, or light to go to black. And again, I'll deselect that. Does it look like I did anything? Let's turn it on and off and look at the difference. Kind of changes where you look, doesn't it? We've de-emphasized that. Actually, I kind of evened the whole thing out a bit. I think it made for a much more interesting image. And again, we started with that and we turned it into that. If we can go full screen on that. And that's pretty darn cool. Yeah. Cloudy sunrise in Bryce Canyon. So that's worth saving. I hadn't actually done that exact edit to this, so I'm going to save it. Any other questions? No questions. You guys are quiet tonight. All right, let's take one last look here. It's getting late, but let's do something happy. Let's do a happy image. We already did a bird. I don't have any llamas, sorry. Oh, let's do this. Yeah, doesn't look happy. Can we make it happy? Of course we can. So I'm going to create a virtual copy. That's our untouched one. We'll finish up with this one since it's almost 10 o'clock. Whoops. How did I end up there again? What did I just do? Oh, I was saving it in the background and it finally kicked in. That's what happened. Finally saved it into Lightroom. Where'd the waterfall go? Let's go back to my grid. All right, I'm going to give you guys a choice because this one's kind of there's my waterfall. So do you want to see the edit on this waterfall? So here's your two choices. That's not it. Yeah. All right. Okay. Waterfall. Do you want to see what this can become? Or do you want to see what this can become? This is Zion. So whoever types in the chat function, what do you want? Waterfall. That Bryce's image is still selected. Waterfall Zion. Zion. This is actually this is a difficult one color. It's got more color problems. So of course you do. Fine. If you want, I'll do them both. All right. You want me to do them both? Oh, the waterfall's winning. Let's do that one. That'll be a quick one. And then for anybody who wants to hang around, I'll do the Zion one also. All right. Develop. Shadows are a problem. Let's just cut. We're just going to blow through this one. Bring the exposure up. Texture, clarity is going to need a lot of dehaze, a lot of saturation. All right. Now, the interesting thing about this one color-wise is that the colors kind of came in automatically for us, but this is more an issue of dealing with light. And yes, there's a waterfall stream falling down here, but it's become a distraction. yes, it's there, but we need to darken the shadows on this. So we're going to use a linear gradient right across where that waterfall's coming down, and we're going to bring the shadows down and add a lot of contrast. We can bring the highlights up. We can have the waterfall still showing, but I want to darken the area beneath it because if we leave the right side of the image as being brighter, it's going to lead you out of the image. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And I'm going to get a brush because this stuff up here, this grass, is too bright as well. I'm going to bring down the exposure and the saturation. Bringing down the saturation will de-emphasize looking at it. And if you really want to de-emphasize looking at it, not only bring the saturation down, but cool it off. So I'm going to make it a little bluer. Kind of takes the life out of it, which in this case is what we're after. In the background here, it needs more contrast. So let's hit K again. We're going to just get a big brush in here and choose these areas. And we're going to add some clarity and dehaze. That will do darkening for us. Now the main water is actually looking a little too blue, and blue does have a tendency to recede. So let's hit K again and select the waterfall. The whole kind of image is bluish. There's not a lot of warmth to it. So let's go ahead and we're going to separate the water out. We're going to make it different than the rest of the image by adding warmth to it. So we're going to take out the blue and see if I bring it just a little yellow, neutralizes out that blue. I'll bring up the shadows, maybe even push the exposure a bit. Excuse me. And this needs a little bit of burning and dodging of its own. This time I'm going to hit K for a new brush, but we're going to turn off auto mask. I don't want it to follow any particular objects. If you have on auto mask, it will only go onto the things that match what you're clicking on. By turning off auto mask, then it goes everywhere you paint. So I want to darken those areas by adding some contrast in it. And I think after I'm done, I'm going to bring up the entire brightness of the image. There we go. And there's too much of the image. This is a falling waterfall. It needs to be more vertical. Yeah, there's a little waterfall here, but it's not really contributing. So I think this is a legal size. I think this is going to be that 8.5 by 14. And we'll add a vignette. And I think a little off the top too. And what's important to the image is personal preference sometimes. Yeah, I think something like that works nicely. Again, considering there's where we ended up. That's what we started with. Is there more I could do to it? Yes, but just a quick one because now we have to go back to Zion. All right, Zion. This is a tough one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off using our profile. Because remember, we have the Adobe color here. Now, I had that January 29th. That was basically a duplicate of that color checker. Let's see what the profile does. Ah, look at that. Look how much better that is already. Look how it fixed. Brought the blues back, opened up the tones a little bit. Is it perfect? No, but that's a great start. So what are the issues? Well, this is in shadow. This color I'm not sure about, but this shadow is definitely off. So let's get a linear gradient, and I'm going to come up through here. And the color temperature is off. I'm not sure which way. Let's find out. Let's add blue to it. Oh yeah, it definitely needs blue. Green, and green. That's what it needed. Let's bring up the saturation on that. And then let's add some texture and clarity to it. Now this is still too bright. Actually, do we really need this? Let's do another gradient. Let's just come in here and darken this. Let's get those highlights down. I don't know if we need all that stuff. There's a little blurry bit of cactus there. I think we'll end up cropping that off. The big things left are these greens in the trees and the actual color of the rock formation. So let's do point color for this. So we'll come down to color mixer, point color. Let's pick some of these greens in the trees. And they are a little too yellow. Let's make them greener. But let's make them darker too. So I'm going to bring the luminance down. And let's see, is the U okay? Saturation. Yeah, it needed some saturation, so let's do that. In fact, that kind of worked. Let's try it on the rocks as well, because you can keep adding colors. And they're a little pinker. Should they be redder or oranger? No, that makes them too. Nope, that's not working for me either. You know what? Whoops. I knew I was going to do that. No, where did it go? Where'd my image go? It was just here. That is so weird. Did it go to the end? No. Did it go to the beginning? Holy cow. It just disappeared on me. Let's see if I have it in here. Oh, there it is. That's weird. I don't know how I got there. Okay. Come on. All right. The color of these looks slightly off to me. I think we're going to have to send this in Photoshop. Command E. And what are we going to have to use? Color balance. And as I'm looking at it, I'm not sure if I love the greens either. So adjustment layer, color balance. And I'm going to zoom into the rocks. Let's get up close so we can see, because I've been here a bunch of times, so I know when the rocks look right. All right, it needs some cyan. Magenta, green, not really. Yellow, blue. It needs some yellow. We're going to have to bring down the luminosity as well. So, Paula, to answer your question, I do keep finding myself going to mid-tone highlight shadows. Yep, there we go. Magenta, green, little green, yellow. By the way, if you're not sure what it does, what it needs, add a whole bunch. Lots of blue, lots of yellow. Does one of them look slightly less worse? In this case, as I go back and forth, I think the blue looks a little less worse, so that means it needs a little bit of blue. And then shadows, red. Yeah, it needs red in the shadows. Magenta, no. Green, maybe a smidge. Yellow. Oh, definitely needed blue. So as I do that, and I can look at the entire image now, actually, that looks a lot better. Actually, for the entire image. It's made down here, the shadow's a little bit dark. That's easy to fix. Actually, I'm kind of liking that. Let's do an overall hue saturation. Add some saturation to it. And, oh, we're starting to look Kodachromy here. I'm kind of liking this. The sky's gotten a little dark, so let's select the sky. And let's bring that up a little bit. So we're going to we'll do curves for the sky. And I'll just get the finger and push it up a little. Just brighten it up. And I want to make it a little bluer. So I'm going to go to the blue, just the blue curve. And you can see I can make it more or less blue just by pushing up there. And actually, as I'm looking at this, I think I want to get the greens. So if I again click on the image itself, let's go back to our friend color range. Let's see what happens if we choose the greens. How good a job does it do? It does terrible job. So we're going to have to select. So we go to sampled colors, get an eyedropper, and I'm going to click in the green. There we go. And I'm going to add to it. And I can add to it just by dragging around. And that got me a little too much. So let's bring the fuzziness down. And look how good a job that did at picking out all the plant life. That's cool. All right, so what do we need? Color balance. Let's do color balance again, except this time it's only going to do it in those parts that are white. That's cool stuff. All right, so color balance. This is just going to affect the greens. Yeah, they can be a little greener, but we're going to need to bring the saturation down. Wow, yeah, they look like fake plants when we do that. So I'm going to adjust the colors. Then we're going to have to do the brightness separately. Let's see, a little bit of red, green, nope, yellow, blue, needs blue. And then lastly, shadows. Yep, the shadows need a little cyan, a little bit of magenta. Oh, there we go, blue. And if we turn that on and off, we can see better. I think it's a little saturated, as is this thing. So we're going to go to use saturation, bring the saturation down. I'm just looking at the greens. And then I am going to copy this mask by alt click and dragging it over so that it only affects that. One last thing. Is this thing bothering anybody else, this plant? Why, yes, Joe, it's bothering me. Okay. I'm going to, actually, that wasn't what I wanted. I'm not going to do a burn and dodge in this. I'm going to do a levels. So let's do a levels adjustment. I'm going to bring that white thing down. Yes, it looks really dark. That's okay. I'm going to fill the mask alt backspace with black. Get a brush, hit X, and then at 30%, start painting in here to bring that out. I just want to darken this thing, and I also want to bring the saturation down on it. So use saturation. I'm going to bring it way down. Bring the lightness down too a little. And then I'm going to apply that same mask we were just using. Again, alt drag. Yeah, I'm just not loving that plant. I think I might have to crop it. So, okay, where do I do my cropping? Well, again, we went from that to that. Better. Let's send it back into Lightroom. Command S. Looking through my notes to see what other tools I haven't gotten into. Yeah, there's a couple of them, but I'll tell you what I'll do. There's a couple of color tools I did not get to, although they're minor players. What I will do over the next couple of weeks is I will create some videos using some of these little more obscure tools and show you how you can use them. All right, so back to Lightroom. Here's our image. Let's get the crop tool. The bottom needs to go, and this needs to be a lot more vertical. So I'm thinking something like that. And yeah, it's just a weird plant. The fact is it's there. I have multiple shots of this scene where this plant is less dominant that I would probably do something with that. Vibrance and saturation. Let's bring the sky up a little bit more. And I'm going to darken the foreground a little more just to try to de-emphasize that stupid plant. So I'm going to bring the saturation down just so I don't have to look at it. All right. So again, we went from there to there. With the exception of this one plant in the foreground that I'm not fond of, it's still pretty cool color fix. Any questions? Diane's trying to find the questions chat panel. No questions? No questions, guys? All right. Well, it's getting late. In fact, we ended up going over by almost 45 minutes, and I'm okay with that. I hope you guys had some fun. That was a lot to go over in those couple of hours. So I will work on the recording over the next couple of days. I'll have it for you by the end of the week, and then you can review and pick out the stuff that most applies to what you want to do. As you could see from all of the images that I have here, there's one, two, three. I had a lot more stuff. This is all the stuff I had prepared for you. So obviously there's much, much more. But what that does is it gives me some subject matter to work with over the next couple of weeks. And I will create some individual videos that I will put in um, the newsletter. Also, coming up, there is a photography kitchen starting again next Wednesday. And the theme for February for a photography kitchen is going to be light and color. So I will do some more demonstrations for, no, Tuesday is the deep dive class. So like, for example, how to take this to that. And I'm not even loving that. That needs a different kind of edit. Another one that I do like is this place. This is actually a place called Kodachrome Basin. It's near Bryce Canyon. Nobody goes here. It's a more of a camping place, but there's some really cool stuff here. So that's a little overdone, but I kind of like it. But that's the kind of things that we'll explore in the photography kitchen stuff this month. It's going to be about color and light. Not as deep as we went tonight, but I will do some separate videos on a specific tool. For example, I'm sure some of you have used filters over your camera. And I'll send this image into Photoshop. There are color filters. If you click on, I don't want to go, I don't want to start a whole something new. We're going to go on and on. I have photo filters. There they are. All of the filters we used to use. Remember we used to all buy filters when we shot film? So if you wanted a warming filter or a cooling filter. So if you wanted to have your image be a little bit warmer, and you can change the density of it. So Photoshop actually has all of these filters that we used to put on front of our camera. And like, for example, on this one, maybe I like what the orange filter did to the foreground, but not to the sky. So again, select the sky and go to the mask, fill it with black. And we just warmed up the foreground. Actually, that worked kind of nicely. Warmed up the foreground and masked out the sky. So that's one of the filters. I'll go over a couple of the filters in some of the videos coming up. But next week's deep dive class, we're going to go into some hardware and how to get prints that look like what you see on your monitor and all of the tools and things you need to go through. And the big things to understand are soft proofing in both Lightroom and in Photoshop. But before you soft proof, you need to make sure your monitor's calibrated. I will go into the color checker passport a little bit more. And then we'll also talk about paper profiles if you're printing on your own printer, or how to prepare a file that you can send out to a lab and be sure that what's going to come back from the lab is what you see on your screen. So that's what we will be doing next Tuesday. So that's it for me. That was, 2 hours and 45 minutes. That was a lot. I know we lost some people who it was too much. So you'll have the recording and you can then fast forward or stop and see what it is you wanted to see. And any questions at any time, by the way, if something is giving you a hard time still, feel free to send me an email whenever you like. I'm happy to hear from you. I'm not actually doing any traveling until the end of April, it looks like at this point. So do with that what you will. Send me an email. If you never want to hear from me again, send me a text. Those of you that have been on trips with me, no, don't send Joe texts if you want to hear back from him. You can send texts to Diane, but I'm happy to talk to you. You can call me on the phone or send me an email. Just don't text me. So if nobody, people have full heads. All right. No more questions then?
Nope.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Enjoyed
So
it.
take some of this stuff and put it to use. And I thank you so much for joining me. And I hope you saw some stuff you think you can put to use. I'm sure there is. Well, I threw a lot at you, but again, that's why you get the recording. You can then review at your leisure. Thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you guys online again soon. Hopefully as soon as next Tuesday. Until then, be well. Have a great week.